wonder if it's your custom to stand during the reading of the gospel. If you're able and willing, you might do so with me. And maybe an apology in advance where I didn't ask about a translation, so this might be different a little than what's on the screen if there's something there. And finally, just an introduction to the passage. It's a little intimidating to run around and drop a message when you don't know anybody or what's happening in their lives. Most pastors, don't live like that. But so I kind of always relied on the lectionary, the common lection, just to guide the readings. And this is today's universal or common lection. And it's a doozy. So I didn't choose this for you. I want to blame this on the Lord, or at least on the Catholic Church. I was Catholic, by the way. I'm one of 10 kids, and we were really Catholic when I was little, but just a couple times a year, normally. From Luke 16, verse 19 through 31, there was once a rich man, expensively dressed in all the latest of fashion, wasting his days in conspicuous consumption. And there was a poor man, Jesus said in this story, named Lazarus, covered with sores, who had been dumped upon the rich man's doorstep. All he lived for was a meal from the scraps from the rich one's table. His best friends were the dogs who came and licked his sores. Then he died, this poor man, and was taken up to the angels and into the lap of Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. Now in hell and in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham in the distance and Lazarus leaning into Abraham. He called out, the rich man called out, "Father, Abraham, mercy, have mercy upon me. Send Lazarus to dip his finger in water to cool my tongue, for I am in agony." But Abraham said, "My child, remember that in your lifetime you received good things and Lazarus the bad things. It is not like that here. He is consoled and you shall be tormented. Besides, in all these matters there is a huge chasm set between us, so that no one can go from us to you even if they wanted to, nor can anyone cross over from you to us." And the rich man then said, "Then please, I ask you, Father, send Lazarus to the house of my father, where I have yet 5 brothers, so he can tell them the score and warn them so they won't end up in this place of torment." Abraham answered, "They have Moses, they have the prophets to tell them, and they should listen to them." "I know, Father Abraham," he said, "but they're not listening. And if someone came back from the dead, then they would change their ways." And Abraham replied, "If they won't listen to Moses nor the prophets, they shall not be convinced even by someone who comes back from the dead." The word of God given to you, the children of God. Thank you. You may be seated. A number of years ago, there was a social experiment whereby this young man in a tattered t-shirt arrived at one of the busiest train stations in Washington, D.C., in a downtown plaza, and he opened a violin case, pulled out a violin, and began to play some music. He played at the beginning at 7:51 in the morning, where there were over 1,100 people who walked by him in a busy rush hour setting. In the bustle of it all, with video cameras recording this social experiment, only 8 people stopped to listen on average for less than 6 minutes and 22 seconds. He received for his efforts of almost an hour of play $32.17. What the crowd didn't know is that it was Joshua Bell who was playing the violin, who made his professional debut as the youngest person ever to play with the Philadelphia Orchestra. The rest is history if you know anything about him. 30 CDs, 4 Grammys, an Oscar, and then added to the collection an Avery Fisher Award, which is the highest musical award that can go to an American artist. Imagine, 2 weeks before he was in Carnegie Hall, he looked like a bum playing in a downtown DC plaza where he got $32. Isn't it interesting that you have one of the greatest musicians in all the world playing some of the greatest music in all the world, and he was literally holding a 1713 Stradivarius to play this, and no one seemed to notice or care. It makes you wonder, even if today the most beautiful message in all the world was offered, maybe not here or at this time, from some of the most extravagant messengers, maybe not this particular moment or this particular messenger, but even if it were, it wouldn't be guaranteed to be heard. And so the music of God, it plays on around us. As C.S. Lewis one time said, it plays quietly in our joy. It plays in the everyday, and loudly it plays in our pain. He called pain the great megaphone that was to awaken a deaf world. The music of God plays, and one wonders, can we hear? Can we listen? Can we overhear? Is it possible that all his life, the rich man received signs, messages, messengers, angels, if you were, some in unawares and some maybe more deliberate, and he was blind and deaf and dumb? Soren Kierkegaard, the famous philosopher, said, if I could prescribe one cure for this broken world, it would be silence. For even if the gospel were declared in action or in word in the most unspeakable of beauty, the noise of this clamoring world would drown out the beauty and the tune of it, making it inaudible at best, and maybe to some even irritating. Ooh, I wonder, what would he say now if that were a couple hundred years ago? We're in danger of hearing a parable like this and simply forming these judgmental opinions that some United Methodist pastors would spew from a pulpit, that there is a virtue in being poor and that rich people are evil. My mother-in-law used to say, who never had 2 dimes to rub together in all her life, there are 2 kinds of lives that are ruined by the lust and love of money. The kinds of lives of people who have it, and from the lives of people who don't. I mean, it seems as though that focus could go either way. But as you approach the parable and hear of the tenderness of Lazarus, it causes you, at least I think at the beginning along with me, to wonder this: how is it that painful circumstances cause some to become bitter and angry and to turn away from God, and that same experience might draw a heart to the unseen and the eternal? Let's look at the 2 characters in the story of Jesus' telling. The rich man had everything the world could offer: ease, splendor, comfort, nice threads, an extravagant chariot, a pension, a house on cribs, and it sounds like he ate fairly well. The rich man never noticed the landscape around him, to notice the needs of the suffering or the indignities of those, or even to think or wonder about the cycles of poverty and the head starts of generations. Yogi Berra one time said, most human beings who stand on third base think they hit triples when most of us were born there. Sometimes when I think of what I've made of my own life, I think of all that I've been given. Oh God, I whisper on so many mornings, I should have been more, I should have been better. The emptiness of his own life was stuffed from the stuff of his wallet. You have taken baths in deeper things than the rich man in this story. He seemed to be all about the radio station WSELF. He was self-reliant, self-centered, self-sufficient. He was self-made, I think he would probably say in his own language. Henry Ford, the great inventor and manufacturer, one time said, and I quote, "The greatest example of poor workmanship is that of a self-made human being." It wasn't like he was against Lazarus or the poor. I think he was just for himself. The philosophy of me first has the power to blow our world to pieces, whether it's applied to business, politics, faith, marriage, child rearing, or any other thing. The idea of me and mine in regards to the ownership of things casts joy out of the inner heart and enslaves us. He forgot, the rich man, or maybe he never thought to begin with, all this stuff was on loan. I remember hearing a story Tony Campolo used to tell of a guy who was being lowered in Hollywood into a grave sitting in a yellow Cadillac, and they had stitched into his mouth a $60 cigar at the time. And the crane operator was overheard to say, "Man, that's living." Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just really not. The poor man, though, and he is the only person in any story or parable that Jesus tells who has a name, Lazarus. It means, "God be my helper." He begged for the morsels and scraps that were the boon to others. He found friends in the animals that would lick his wounds. He chose no bitterness. He accepted his pain in life as a trial. He was tested and found worthy. His faith seemed to carry him into a tender space of relying and trusting that somehow God had him, and by faith he had garnered not so much the treasures of earth, but the treasures of heaven. His tears had not blinded him to see mercy, and Lazarus discovered the blessedness, in the words of St. Thomas Aquinas, of nothing. For when he said our hands are empty, it's easier to see sometimes and receive the good gifts that God has to give us. As the story goes, the rich man, well, he wasn't just buried, but with pageantry and ceremony and beautiful words and eulogies and pastors who were probably having to be paid money to say something nice about him, and probably a wife and kids who didn't cry much. And then the poor man died and was buried. And in the story, Jesus seems to indicate there's no halfway house, no on-deck circles, no pass go and collect $200, no pockets and shrouds, no hearses pulling U-Hauls, but an eternal separation and a conditioning of a heart that made one ready for the gifts of God and the other who still couldn't see them when they were staring him in the face. Think of this. He was in a place of torment, which means to me like to play golf. Like people who think there's golf in heaven, I think that's on the other side. Like every time I play and I think I can play and I hit a ball in confidence, I do this, like this, which I think is a gnashing of teeth and a weeping of sorts, where I say, I wish I had that back, which when I was younger and played with people who loved me, that was called a mulligan, but no more these days at my age. So there's no mulligan. There's only the regret of what could have been, what should have been, what might have been to haunt him. And still, he's ordering Lazarus around. Still, God is no better than a genie or an errand boy to this rich guy who says, send him here to dip his finger and take care of me. Oh, dear heavens, I wonder, is there any end to his arrogance and his selfishness? Does he ever just say, I blew it? Is there any way that he would think of something other than, well, then at least send him to my Father's house as is back from the dead to convince them? Eleanor Roosevelt, one time, when married to a very difficult person who cheated repeatedly on her, was asked, how can you love this man? She said, and I quote, well, we still have this in common. We fell in love with the same man years ago. Lazarus laid his head now on the pillow of those who had gone before him in faith. It was his place now to find rest. Let me offer three relatively brief points, and then I'll go home quietly. First is an old phrase in Latin, memento mori, which means this: just remember that we'll die one day. I know some of you say, that sounds really morbid, but to me it's morbid not to think of it when it's the one fact we can count on. I was raised by a generation who always said to me, you know, you can do anything you want, but you have to die and pay taxes. And I've seen people not pay taxes, but I've never seen anybody but one escape the other. It's amazing, it affects one out of every one people. Death is certain to us. Remember the perspective of it. What's in our hands is not ours. Remember, death's dark light can be bright. In my ministry of over 40 years of caring for people in the local church and having done over 600 funerals and seeing, I remember one young man with brain cancer say, I can see perfectly now with brain cancer. I can, he said, as his eyes became more blurred. He said, I know now that paying bills, cleaning the house, having a perfect lawn and windows without stains is not the goal of my life. He didn't sit around with regrets that he wished he had made more money or driven better cars. He just simply had the thoughts that most thoughtful people have around, how will I be judged around the loves of my life? St. John of the Cross one time said, and I quote, in the end, we will only be judged. We will only be judged by our love for God and our love for others. The church was always dreamt to be a place of love, of generosity, of risk, of mission, not of holy huddles. Dr. Johnson one time said that the thought of our own death wonderfully can clear our own mind. It's something we're thinking about just for a moment, every morning before we leave the house, and then live our life with the perspective of the end first, and then all else falls into place. Secondly, we will all get the chance to see that face. We will. There will be a moment, a time in each of our lives where we will clearly see that face, and we shall run to it in delight, knowing that it was the only face we ever wanted to see in all our lives, or we will be repelled and turn away in horror. His voice will be revealed soft and concealed to the hard, and the same light that fulfills some will threaten others. The same holiness, self-giving, unconditional love, the grace that was willing to suffer and die for us will be the greatest thing in the world to run to for some, and for others, a horror and a disgust. Augustine wonders metaphysically, many, many hundreds of years ago, could heaven and hell be the very same place, he wonders? Could the glory of God be the fires of hell, depending on how you see it, how you hear it, how you've been conditioned to respond to it? He wonders, either we shall run to that face or we shall turn into our own shadow and run eternally away. For where could we ever go from the Spirit of God? Where could we flee? Says the psalmist, if I make my bed in heaven, there you are. If I go down into the depths of hell, there you are too. To one, a praise, to the other, a lament and a torment. One time I went to Blossom Music Center with a young lady in our youth group. She came with my family and she was later to play for the Cleveland Orchestra. She was this gifted violinist. And as I watched her listen to the music, she was gone. During a Bach concerto, she was somewhere else. And even though I liked it, I would even say maybe loved it, I wasn't conditioned to know it in the way that she was. And as I watched her watch them, I thought, I'm missing something. This is what the saints do to us. We watch them in the streets, dancing, playing, responding to God, not seeing over our heads what they might be seeing, but to see them awakens in us. Maybe there is more. Maybe we can learn from everything. Maybe everything both conceals and hides God only yet from the perspective of what we see. Why, I wonder, doesn't God just come back from the dead? Well, he did. Why doesn't he come like a mile-high green giraffe, like a person with a voice like Ezra Earl Jones or Skywrite for us? Maybe he does. Maybe he does in so many ways, and we're blind to see it. Soren Kierkegaard wonders this in Philosophical Fragments, that he talks about a prince who wants to woo and court the love of a peasant girl without her being afraid, so he disguises himself as one from a village and sneaks into it. And as he proposes to her, he says to her he has nothing to offer but himself, not knowing that he's yet to be the king. She responds in love. Kierkegaard said, what if it is that God came not to force his hand, to compel us to obedience, but to awaken us to love? Maybe then, number 3, there are plenty of signs that point to God, but only in hidden humility. A child born in the night among beasts, those who believe in God can never again be sure of God, for once they have seen into a stable and given the soundbite of an announcement, we can never be sure how he will appear or what lengths of ludicrous self-deprecation he will go to for the likes of the love of you and me. Who is this God, we wonder, who suffers on a tree? If I were God, well, you don't know much about me, but I bet you're thinking already, I'm glad he's not. I would have come, if I had to as a man, something powerful, something styling, something attractive, something to push people around and make them do the right stuff. If I'd come as an ape, I would have climbed to the top of the biggest tree. If I were a spider, I would weave a web that would end up in spider elegance. If I were a queen, at least I'd be a beautiful one. But God comes on a cross, spit on, laughed at, whipped until his skin came off, and humbled himself so that we who would see him would turn our faces in shame. If I were God and I were to raise from the dead, I would have done it with a little CNN action, better marketing device, something, but maybe, just maybe, in the infinitely gentle, infinitely humble, infinitely suffering God, there is a dignity here, that he yearns to be known and loved. He wishes to be sought after. He aches for us to pick up on signs and to overhear music. He's no harlot who throws himself at every passerby, but is a lover to you, who woos and courts and drops hankies in the form of people and Shasta daisies and situations in life. And as Wesleyan Christians, we celebrate the grace of God in all the wild and unpredictable forms it comes in. Everything in the economy of Jesus has the opportunity to fashion us into a true human being. If only we could overhear music. If only we could know who it is that plays. If only we could read signs. There's a time now to open ourselves and to look today with majesty upon the people brought into our lives. My little granddaughter the other day was behind me in the car. She unclipped her seatbelt. She got up and was fingering my white hair. I want to say gray, but it's not even gray anymore. She said to me, and I quote, "Papa, what's it like to be so old?" I said to her, "Oh, sweetheart, everything gets more beautiful. The fall will be more beautiful this year. And you're even prettier to me than your mom." There's something about people and places and situations whereby we are not composers of our life, but simply overhearers. Bach, the great composer that we call of him, resented being called a composer. He said he was only an overhearer. He would write at the beginning of every single piece of music, "Jesus, be my help." And at the end, to God be the glory. He said he was only an overhearer, and had he written it down the way he had heard it, the uncorrupted version would have converted the whole world upon its hearing. He said, I missed it. Let me close with this quick story, and then I'll be done. In my ministry life, formally as well as in my retired life, I'm given to a ministry called Royal Family Kids Camp, which is a thing that mobilizes local churches, and we take children from our local foster systems to camp. 100 of us from different United Methodist churches in Northeast Ohio will gather in 5 different camp settings in different counties, and we will love these children who have been thrown up against walls and left behind by moms and dads, and who have found themselves in such great need. And it makes me realize every year that I do this for the last almost 30, as well as in my mentoring, that God chooses the weak and the foolish and the humble and the lowly and the gentle to awaken us to new music. One particular week at camp, there was a little boy named Brendan who was inaudible because of his abuse, and most likely from fetal alcohol or drug syndrome. He was, I think, 11 years old and couldn't really speak. He just sort of had these little squeaks and murmurs. We do this thing on Thursday night. It's a talentless show. We call it a talent show, but there's not really that much that goes on there of real talent. But we cheer for the kids. We all scream for them like idiots. The whole room will explode on these little things that they sing or these balls they try to juggle. And Brandon was sitting next to me. I had my arm around this little guy, and he was just watching. He kept motioning that he wanted to go up and do something. And I kept saying, oh, sweetheart. Like, I was trying to protect him from the pain of failing again, just again and again. These are the kids that get kicked out of camp and schools and other settings. In a home for children who have no other home, even foster homes, Brandon kept motioning to me that he wanted to go up, and finally, just sort of out of his persistence, I said, oh, okay. And he gets up with these 2 little Lego characters, and he did some mime or skit. None of us really knew what he had said or done, but the whole room like exploded to cheer for him when he was finished, and he had these tears of joy, like he'd come out of himself and done something different, unusual. And then I heard him speak the first words that I had ever heard since he was 6 and start to come to our camp. He said thanks to us who would simply cheer for him. And just for a moment, just for a millimoment, I thought, I don't care if my kids end up as honor students or win a state championship in anything. I just hope, for God's sake, they turn into human beings and learn to say thank you in the name of Christ. Amen.